I stood frozen in my cabin doorway watching my sister Jessica, her husband Brad, and my parents unloading furniture from a massive moving truck without my permission. The betrayal sliced through me as I realized they had orchestrated this takeover for months. My father bellowed that I was being selfish with family property, while Jessica waved fake legal documents claiming co-ownership. My voice trembled as the devastating truth hit me. My own family had conspired to steal everything I had worked for. 2 years ago, my grandfather Frank left me his cabin in the mountains of Montana. It was not just any property. This beautiful 12-acre retreat was worth $350,000 and held memories that money could never replace. Frank had built it with his own hands in 1973, and I was the only family member who had spent real time there with him. Every weekend during my college years, I drove the 3 hours from Missoula to help him with maintenance projects. We replaced the roof together, rebuilt the deck, and upgraded the plumbing system. While my sister Jessica was busy with sorority life, and my parents were focused on their careers, I was learning carpentry skills and listening to Grandpa's stories about his time as a forest ranger. The inheritance came with a heartfelt letter explaining his decision. Frank wrote that he had watched our family dynamics for decades and knew I was the one who truly appreciated the cabin's value beyond its monetary worth. He had observed how my parents, Robert and Linda, only visited during holidays, and how Jessica showed up mainly when she needed money or wanted to impress boyfriends with the scenic location. I work as a software developer for a tech company in Bozeman, earning a solid $75,000 annually. The remote work arrangement allowed me to spend extended periods at the cabin, which became my sanctuary. I installed high-speed internet, converted the basement into a home office, and maintained the property exactly as Grandpa would have wanted. When Frank passed away and left me the cabin, my parents initially seemed supportive. Robert, a retired insurance agent, and Linda, who worked as a school administrator, congratulated me and said Frank made the right choice. Jessica, who was 26 and working part-time as a dental hygienist, also appeared genuinely happy for me. But things started changing after Jessica married Brad 18 months ago. Brad Thompson was a 31-year-old man with big dreams and poor execution. He had launched a gourmet food truck business in Billings that failed spectacularly, losing $60,000 of borrowed money. Then he convinced Jessica to invest her savings in cryptocurrency just before the market crashed, wiping out another $40,000. Jessica's financial stress became obvious during family gatherings. She worked only 3 days a week at the dental office, earning barely enough to cover their apartment rent. Brad seemed to drift between various get-rich-quick schemes instead of finding steady employment. He would monopolize dinner conversations with elaborate business plans that never materialized. About 6 months ago, my parents approached me during Sunday dinner with what seemed like an innocent request. Linda suggested that maybe the family should visit the cabin more often, emphasizing how much Frank would have loved seeing everyone together there. Robert nodded enthusiastically, proposing that we establish regular family weekends to honor Grandpa's memory. I welcomed the idea completely. The cabin had plenty of space with 4 bedrooms, and I loved cooking for the family in Frank's oversized kitchen. Those first few visits were wonderful. We played cards on the deck, took long hikes through the surrounding forest, and shared stories about Grandpa while sitting around the stone fireplace he had built. However, I began noticing strange behavior during these visits. Jessica spent unusual amounts of time asking about the cabin's internet capabilities and zoning regulations. She wondered whether the property was classified as residential or if it could be used for commercial purposes. When I asked why she was curious, she laughed it off and said she was just interested in real estate matters. Brad's behavior was even more peculiar. He wandered around the property with his phone, taking detailed photographs of every room and structure. I caught him measuring the main lodge area and sketching rough floor plans. He claimed he was impressed by Grandpa's craftsmanship and wanted to document it for family records. My parents also began making subtle comments about how the cabin was too much responsibility for one person. Robert suggested that Frank probably intended for the entire family to share the property, even though the will explicitly stated otherwise. Linda worried aloud about the financial burden of maintaining such a large property alone. The first real red flag appeared when I was scrolling through social media one evening. Brad had posted several photos of the cabin on Facebook with the caption, "Getting excited about our new property investment. Big changes coming soon." The images showed him standing on the deck with his arms spread wide, grinning like he owned the place. My stomach dropped as I read through the comments. Brad was responding to congratulations from friends by talking about expanding the family business and finally having the space we need for our dreams. He had tagged the location and included hashtags like new beginnings and family business. I immediately called Jessica to ask about the posts. She sounded nervous and said Brad was just excited about spending time at the cabin. When I pressed her for clarification about the property investment comment, she became defensive and accused me of being paranoid. She insisted that Brad was simply proud to be part of a family with such a beautiful retreat. But something in her tone told me there was much more to this situation than innocent enthusiasm. The way she deflected my questions and quickly ended the conversation left me feeling uneasy. I started paying closer attention to my family's behavior during subsequent visits, and what I discovered would change everything. The discovery of Brad's social media posts marked the beginning of what I can only describe as a coordinated pressure campaign. Within days of my confronting Jessica, my mother began calling me daily with elaborate guilt trips about family unity and shared responsibility. Linda would call every morning before work, timing her conversations perfectly to catch me during my coffee routine. She spoke in dramatic, emotional tones about how disappointed Frank would be to see the family divided over material possessions. According to her, Grandpa had always dreamed of the entire family spending time together at his beloved cabin. These conversations followed a predictable pattern. Linda would start by asking about my health and work, then gradually steer toward the cabin situation. She painted vivid pictures of family gatherings that never actually happened, claiming Frank had always envisioned children running through the woods while their parents relaxed on the deck. She conveniently forgot that Jessica had never shown interest in having children, and that our family gatherings had historically been tense affairs. My father took a different approach. Robert would arrive unannounced at my apartment in Bozeman, claiming he was in the neighborhood for various errands. These surprise visits always included lengthy lectures about inheritance responsibility and family obligations. He carried a worn leather notebook filled with quotes he claimed came from Frank about the importance of keeping families together. Robert's presentations were methodical and calculated. He would reference conversations with Frank that I had never witnessed describing detailed discussions about the cabin, serving as a family headquarters for future generations. He spoke with the authority of someone who had spent decades selling insurance policies using persuasion techniques that had worked on countless clients. Jessica's pressure tactics were more emotional and persistent. She sent me lengthy text messages at all hours, sharing childhood memories and emphasizing how much the cabin meant to her personal happiness. Her messages painted her current living situation as desperate and hopeless, describing their cramped apartment and mounting financial pressures. These texts arrived at strategic times. Late at night when I was trying to relax early in the morning before important work meetings, and during weekends when I was at the cabin trying to enjoy solitude. Jessica wrote about crying herself to sleep because she felt excluded from her own family heritage. She claimed that being denied equal access to the cabin was affecting her marriage and mental health. Brad's involvement in this campaign was more aggressive and unsettling. He started showing up at the cabin without invitation, claiming he was there to help with maintenance projects. These visits happened when I was away for work, and I would return to find evidence of his presence: tools moved, furniture rearranged, and personal items displaced. During one particularly disturbing visit, I caught Brad in my home office, examining property deeds and insurance documents that I kept in a locked filing cabinet. He claimed he was looking for a phone charger, but the cabinet key was hidden in a location only I knew about. When I confronted him about this invasion of privacy, he became defensive and accused me of being paranoid and unwelcoming to family. The situation escalated when my parents organized what they called an intervention dinner at their house in Bozeman. They invited me under the pretense of celebrating Linda's birthday, but the real agenda became clear when Brad and Jessica arrived with prepared statements and printed materials about family finances. The dining room table was covered with documents, newspaper clippings about property taxes, insurance quotes for large homes, and maintenance cost estimates for mountain properties. Robert had prepared a PowerPoint presentation on his laptop titled Sustainable Family Property Management. The whole setup felt like a business meeting rather than a birthday celebration. During dinner, the conversation quickly turned to the cabin situation. Linda tearfully explained that Jessica and Brad were facing eviction from their apartment because they could not afford the monthly rent increase. The landlord had raised their payment from $800 to $1,200, putting their housing beyond reach of Jessica's part-time income. Robert presented detailed financial projections showing how sharing the cabin would benefit everyone involved. According to his calculations, splitting property taxes and maintenance costs 4 ways would save everyone money while providing Jessica and Brad with free housing. He emphasized the practical benefits of having multiple people available to handle emergencies and property upkeep. Jessica broke down crying as she described their desperate financial situation. She revealed that Brad's food truck business debts were still accumulating interest, and their credit cards were maxed out from trying to cover basic living expenses. She painted a picture of a young couple struggling to survive while family members had more resources than they could use alone. The emotional manipulation reached its peak when Linda pulled out old photo albums filled with pictures of family gatherings at the cabin. She pointed to images of Jessica and me as children, building snowmen and roasting marshmallows, claiming these memories proved we belonged there together. She suggested that Frank would be heartbroken to know his legacy was causing family division. When I offered to help with rent money instead of sharing the cabin, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The family's facade of concern and cooperation crumbled, revealing the calculated nature of their approach. Robert slammed his hand on the table and accused me of missing the point entirely. Jessica's tears turned to anger as she accused me of abandoning the family when they needed me most. She said I had become selfish and cold, since inheriting the cabin caring more about property than people. Brad remained mostly silent but made several veiled threats about legal options for contesting inheritance decisions. My parents delivered an ultimatum that evening. Linda said they would be forced to cut contact with me unless I agreed to do the right thing by sharing the cabin. Robert warned that I was destroying the family over material possessions and would regret my stubbornness when it was too late to repair the damage. I left that dinner feeling isolated, confused, and emotionally drained. The people I had trusted most in the world were using every manipulation tactic imaginable to pressure me into giving up something that rightfully belonged to me. I spent sleepless nights questioning whether I was being unreasonable or if my family was asking for something completely inappropriate. The pressure campaign continued for weeks, with daily phone calls, unexpected visits, and emotional text messages. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Through a casual conversation with my neighbor at the cabin, I learned that my family had been meeting regularly without me for months, planning this coordinated approach to convince me to share the property. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived in the nearest cabin about half a mile away, mentioned seeing my parents' car at the local diner several times during the past few months. She said they always seemed to be having serious discussions with Jessica and Brad, spreading papers across the table and taking notes. She had assumed they were planning surprise parties or family vacations. This revelation hit me like a physical blow. My family had not spontaneously become concerned about my well-being or Jessica's housing situation. They had been conducting secret meetings, developing strategies, and coordinating their pressure tactics. The intervention dinner, the daily phone calls, and the emotional manipulation were all part of a calculated campaign designed to wear down my resistance. I realized that everything I had experienced over the past 6 months was orchestrated manipulation rather than genuine family concern. The trust I had placed in my parents and sister had been weaponized against me, and their expressions of love were actually tools of coercion. This discovery would prove to be just the beginning of a much larger and more disturbing conspiracy that was about to unfold. The truth about my family's secret meetings led me to investigate further, and what I discovered shocked me to my core. My childhood friend Danny worked at the county zoning office in Hamilton, and during a casual conversation, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Danny told me that Jessica and Brad had submitted multiple applications for business permits using my cabin's address. They were not simply hoping to move in as family members. They were planning to transform my property into a commercial wedding venue called Mountain Retreat Wedding Venue. I immediately drove to the county office to examine these documents myself. The applications were thorough and professional, containing detailed business plans, financial projections, and marketing strategies. According to their paperwork, they projected annual revenues of potentially $200,000 from hosting weddings, corporate retreats, and family reunions. The most disturbing aspect was that Brad had listed himself as the primary property owner on every single document. He had forged my signature on several forms and created fake ownership transfer papers to support his claims. The applications included architectural drawings showing how they planned to modify the cabin's layout, adding commercial kitchen facilities, expanding parking areas, and installing additional bathroom facilities. Their business plan was incredibly detailed. They had researched local wedding venues, identified pricing gaps in the market, and developed comprehensive packages for different types of events. They planned to charge couples between $5,000 and $8,000 for wedding ceremonies, with additional fees for catering, photography, and overnight accommodations. What made this betrayal even more painful was discovering that they had already begun marketing their non-existent business. Using photos taken during their visits to my cabin, they had created a professional website and social media presence. They had posted stunning images of the property on wedding planning websites, describing it as an exclusive mountain retreat available for bookings. The website featured testimonials from supposed previous clients and detailed descriptions of amenities that did not exist. They claimed to offer luxury accommodations for up to 50 guests, gourmet catering services, and professional wedding planning assistance. They had even created fake reviews praising the venue's beautiful scenery and exceptional service. I was horrified to learn that they had already accepted deposits from 3 couples planning weddings for the following summer. These innocent people had paid them thousands of dollars based on completely fraudulent representations. Brad had collected $15,000 in advance payments for events that could never take place because he had no legal right to use my property. Confronting Jessica at her workplace was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I waited for her outside the dental office where she worked part-time, armed with printed copies of all the permit applications and website materials. When she saw the documents, her face went completely white, and she began trembling. Jessica initially tried to deny any knowledge of the business plan, claiming Brad had acted without her consent. But when I showed her the signature on several applications that clearly matched her handwriting, she broke down crying and confessed everything. The truth she revealed was even more disturbing than I had imagined. Brad had not simply developed this scheme on his own. He had threatened to divorce Jessica unless she helped him secure access to the cabin. He had convinced her that their financial problems were so severe that they would face bankruptcy and homelessness without this business opportunity. He painted the wedding venue plan as their only chance to escape crushing debt and build a stable future. Jessica revealed that Brad owed money to dangerous people beyond the legitimate business debts I knew about. He had borrowed $20,000 from loan sharks to cover gambling losses, and these creditors were becoming increasingly aggressive about collecting payment. She showed me threatening text messages and photos of their car with slashed tires, evidence of escalating pressure from these illegal lenders. The gambling addiction was news to me and explained many of Brad's erratic behaviors over the past year. Jessica said he spent most nights at underground poker games and online betting sites, chasing losses with increasingly desperate wagers. He had hidden this addiction from everyone, including Jessica, until the debts became impossible to conceal. She also revealed that my parents knew about the entire business plan and had been promised 15% of all profits in exchange for their assistance. Robert and Linda were not innocent victims of Brad's manipulation. They were active participants in the scheme who stood to benefit financially from its success. My father had already told his golf buddies about the family's upcoming wedding venue business, boasting about their smart investment in mountain property. Linda had spent weeks designing business cards, brochures, and marketing materials for the venture. She had even contacted local newspapers about featuring their new business in upcoming tourism articles. This revelation shattered my remaining trust in my parents completely. They had not been manipulated into supporting Brad's plan. They had been enthusiastic partners from the beginning. Their emotional appeals about family unity and Frank's wishes were calculated lies designed to help them profit from stealing my inheritance. Jessica begged me to go along with the business plan to save her marriage and protect her from Brad's creditors. She painted herself as a victim, caught between impossible circumstances, forced to choose between betraying her brother and facing potential violence from dangerous people. She promised that I would receive the majority of profits and could maintain primary residence at the cabin. But I had already discovered additional evidence that made any compromise impossible. During my investigation at the county office, I found vendor contracts that Brad had signed using my property as collateral. He had agreements with catering companies, florists, photographers, and equipment rental businesses, all of which expected payment guarantees backed by the cabin's value. These contracts represented potential liabilities of over $100,000. If Brad's business failed, or if legal issues arose, these vendors could place liens against my property to recover their losses. He had essentially gambled with my inheritance as collateral without my knowledge or consent, putting my financial security at enormous risk. The most shocking discovery came when I realized that Brad had been telling people throughout the community that I was mentally unstable and unfit to manage the property. He had spread rumors about my psychological condition to justify the family's need to take control of the cabin. Local business owners and neighbors had been hearing these lies for months, creating a foundation for his takeover plans. This character assassination campaign explained some of the strange looks and conversations I had experienced recently in town. People who had known me for years were treating me with unusual caution and concern, apparently believing Brad's fabricated stories about my mental health deterioration. I left my conversation with Jessica feeling completely betrayed by everyone I had trusted. My family was not trying to help me or preserve Frank's legacy. They were conducting an elaborate fraud scheme, using my inheritance as their primary asset. The people who should have protected me were instead plotting to destroy my financial security and reputation for their own benefit. The discovery that they had already signed contracts with vendors using my property made immediate action necessary. These agreements created legal obligations that could result in lawsuits, liens, and financial ruin if not addressed quickly. I realized that my family's conspiracy had moved far beyond emotional manipulation into criminal territory, and I needed professional help to protect myself from the legal and financial consequences of their fraud. I was driving to the cabin on a Friday evening in late September, looking forward to a peaceful weekend, working on some software projects, and enjoying the fall colors. The mountain air was crisp, and the aspen trees were displaying brilliant golden leaves against the evergreen backdrop. I had deliberately not told my family about this visit, hoping to avoid any confrontations while I figured out how to handle their business scheme. As I turned onto the gravel road leading to my property, I immediately noticed something was wrong. A massive U-Haul truck was blocking my driveway, its bright orange bulk completely out of place in the serene mountain setting. Behind it sat my parents' sedan and Jessica's compact car, both loaded with boxes and personal belongings. I parked on the road and walked toward the cabin, my heart pounding, as I tried to process what was happening. The scene before me looked like a well-organized military operation. My father was directing traffic, pointing and gesturing as if he were a construction foreman overseeing a major project. Linda was standing near the cabin's front porch, with a clipboard checking items off a detailed list, as various family members carried furniture and boxes inside. She wore her most authoritative expression, the same look she used when organizing school events during her administrator career. Jessica and Brad were unloading bedroom furniture from the truck, including a queen-sized mattress set and a large wooden dresser that I did not recognize. They moved with purpose and efficiency, clearly following a predetermined plan for arranging their belongings inside my home. The most shocking part was seeing my grandfather's carefully preserved furniture being pushed aside and damaged in the process. His handmade oak dining table, which he had crafted in his basement workshop, now bore fresh scratches from being dragged across the wooden floor. The rocking chair where he used to sit and read every evening was shoved into a corner, partially hidden behind boxes of Brad's belongings. Brad was acting as the operations foreman, directing everyone's movements and barking orders about where different items should be placed. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned the property, pointing to various rooms and explaining his vision for reorganizing the space to accommodate the family's needs. I approached the group in a state of shock, barely able to find words to express my outrage. When I demanded an explanation for this invasion, my family responded with what appeared to be carefully rehearsed responses, suggesting they had anticipated and prepared for this confrontation. Robert stepped forward with his insurance salesman's smile and explained that they were helping me transition to a more appropriate living arrangement. According to him, I had been struggling with the responsibilities of maintaining such a large property alone, and they had decided to intervene before I made any decisions I would regret later. Linda nodded enthusiastically and described their plan as a loving family intervention designed to help me see reason. She claimed that I had been isolating myself at the cabin for unhealthy amounts of time, avoiding social interactions, and neglecting my career development. Moving the family in would provide me with essential social support and shared responsibilities. Jessica tearfully explained that they had tried reasoning with me for months, but I had been too stubborn and selfish to consider their needs. She portrayed their actions as a last resort, forced by my unwillingness to voluntarily share Frank's legacy with the people who loved him just as much as I did. But it was Brad's behavior that truly revealed the calculated nature of their invasion. He produced a thick folder containing what he claimed were legal documents proving their right to occupy the property. These papers included the same forged signatures I had discovered at the county office, along with additional fraudulent materials designed to create the appearance of legal authority. The documents included a fake codicil to Frank's will that supposedly granted shared ownership to all family members. They had created professional-looking letterhead for a non-existent law firm and forged the signatures of fictional attorneys. The papers contained legal language that sounded convincing but was completely meaningless. Brad also showed me what he claimed was a rental agreement that I had supposedly signed, granting them permission to live at the cabin for 12 months in exchange for property maintenance services. The signature on this document was clearly forged, but he presented it with complete confidence, as if he genuinely believed it would hold up under scrutiny. My neighbors from nearby cabins had gathered to watch the commotion, clearly confused by the unusual activity on what was normally a quiet mountain road. Mrs. Patterson stood at the edge of my property, with her arms crossed, looking concerned about the disruption to the peaceful neighborhood. When these neighbors approached to ask what was happening, my family immediately launched into their prepared story about my mental health crisis. Linda spoke in hushed, worried tones about my recent behavioral changes and their family's obligation to provide support during my difficult period. Robert explained to the neighbors that I had been making irrational decisions about the property and threatening to sell it to strangers rather than keep it in the family. He portrayed their intervention as a necessary step to protect both my well-being and Frank's legacy from my supposedly deteriorating judgment. Brad told the neighbors that I had been having episodes of paranoia and aggression, making it unsafe for me to live alone in such an isolated location. He claimed they were moving in, temporarily, to provide supervision and support, while I received professional mental health treatment. These lies were delivered with such conviction and apparent concern that some neighbors seemed to believe them. Mrs. Patterson looked at me with newfound worry, as if she was seeing signs of instability that she had missed before. The character assassination campaign Brad had been conducting was proving effective in creating doubt about my credibility. When I loudly protested these false claims, Brad stepped forward and threatened to call the police if I became violent or disruptive. He positioned himself between me and the other family members as if protecting them from my dangerous behavior. This theatrical display was clearly intended to reinforce their narrative about my mental instability. I immediately called my lawyer friend Steve, who lived about 2 hours away in Missoula. While waiting for him to arrive, I documented everything with photos and videos on my phone despite Brad's demands that I stop recording their personal belongings and activities. My family refused to leave the property, claiming they had nowhere else to go and that removing them would constitute elder abuse and domestic violence. Linda dramatically declared that forcing elderly parents to sleep in their car would be both illegal and morally unconscionable. Jessica set up what appeared to be a children's bedroom in one of the upstairs rooms, complete with cribs and toys, even though she and Brad had no children. When I questioned this bizarre addition, she explained that they were planning to start a family soon and needed appropriate accommodations for their future children. Brad began marking his territory throughout the property, changing locks on the storage sheds and installing new deadbolts on doors that had never been secured before. He claimed these security improvements were necessary to protect the family's belongings from potential theft or vandalism. The most disturbing moment came when I discovered that my family had been intercepting my mail for weeks, collecting important documents and correspondence at the post office, using forged authorization forms. They had signatures from me on Postal Service paperwork that I had never signed, giving them access to my private communications. Among the intercepted mail were bills, insurance documents, and correspondence from my employer that could have affected my job security. They had also collected bank statements and investment account summaries, gaining detailed knowledge of my financial situation that they planned to use in their takeover scheme. Brad revealed that they had created fake rental agreements backdated to several months earlier, making it appear that their occupancy of the cabin was legal and long-standing. These documents were designed to establish squatters' rights and make their removal through legal channels more complicated and time-consuming. As darkness fell and Steve still had not arrived, I realized that my family had planned this invasion with meticulous attention to detail. They had considered potential legal challenges, prepared responses to various objections, and created backup plans for different scenarios. This was not a desperate last-minute decision. It was a calculated assault on my property rights executed with military precision. The sight of my grandfather's sanctuary being transformed into the headquarters for my family's fraudulent business scheme filled me with a rage and heartbreak that I had never experienced before. These people who claimed to love me were systematically destroying everything that Frank had worked to preserve, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces and legal documents in their hands. Steve arrived at the cabin around 10 o'clock that evening, his headlights cutting through the mountain darkness as he navigated the gravel road. As a criminal defense attorney with 15 years of experience, he had dealt with fraud cases before, but the elaborate nature of my family's scheme clearly surprised him. I met Steve at his car, and quickly explained the situation while we walked toward the cabin. The U-Haul truck was still blocking the driveway and lights were on throughout the building as my family continued organizing their belongings inside. The scene looked surreal, like strangers had invaded my sanctuary and were making themselves at home. Steve's first action was to examine the documents that Brad had proudly displayed earlier. Within minutes, he identified multiple legal problems with the paperwork, including obvious forgeries, invalid notary seals, and references to non-existent law firms. He photographed everything with his phone while explaining that these materials constituted clear evidence of criminal fraud. When we entered the cabin, Brad immediately became confrontational, demanding to know who Steve was and what authority he had to examine private family documents. Steve calmly introduced himself as my legal counsel and explained that he was there to investigate potential criminal activity on my property. The transformation inside the cabin was heartbreaking. Jessica had rearranged Frank's living room, completely pushing his favorite leather recliner into storage and replacing it with a modern sectional sofa that looked completely out of place. Brad had converted Frank's workshop area into a home office for their wedding business, covering the workbench with laptops and marketing materials. Steve methodically examined each forged document while explaining the legal consequences to my family. He pointed out that forging signatures on legal documents was a felony in Montana, punishable by up to 10 years in prison and substantial fines. Creating fake rental agreements and property transfer documents constituted multiple counts of fraud that could result in federal charges. Brad's demeanor shifted dramatically when confronted by someone with actual legal expertise. His confident facade crumbled as Steve identified specific criminal statutes that applied to his actions. Brad started making excuses and claiming that the documents were rough drafts or misunderstandings rather than intentional fraud. Steve warned the family that they needed to leave the property immediately or face criminal charges for trespassing, fraud, and burglary. He explained that their continued presence on my land without permission constituted criminal trespassing regardless of any fake documents they had created. When Brad refused to leave and became increasingly aggressive, Steve called the sheriff's department to report the ongoing criminal activity. Brad made the mistake of shoving Steve during the heated argument that followed, which constituted assault on an attorney in the performance of his duties, an additional felony charge. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 30 minutes, their patrol cars creating a light show against the cabin's rustic walls. Deputy Martinez and Deputy Johnson were both familiar with property disputes in the rural county, but the complexity of this fraud case clearly exceeded typical neighbor conflicts they usually handled. My family immediately launched into their prepared story about my mental health crisis and their caring intervention. Linda tearfully explained to the deputies that I had been making threatening phone calls and behaving erratically, forcing them to take protective action for everyone's safety. Robert produced his folder of fake documents and attempted to convince the deputies that they had legal authority to occupy the property. He spoke with his insurance salesman's persuasiveness, trying to create confusion about the ownership situation and family rights. Brad made the situation worse by becoming argumentative with the deputies, demanding that they arrest me for harassment and threatening behavior. He claimed that I was violating a restraining order that did not exist and that my presence on the property was illegal. Steve calmly presented the deputies with Frank's original will, property deeds, and tax records, proving my sole ownership of the cabin. The contrast between legitimate legal documents and my family's obvious forgeries was immediately apparent to the experienced officers. Deputy Martinez examined the forged signatures on Brad's fake rental agreements and noticed that they did not match my signature on the authentic property documents. She had investigated fraud cases before and recognized the telltale signs of document manipulation and identity theft. The situation reached a turning point when Deputy Johnson discovered that Brad had outstanding warrants for unpaid gambling debts in 3 different counties. His background check revealed a pattern of financial fraud and identity theft that supported Steve's criminal allegations. Brad was arrested on multiple charges, including forgery, fraud, assault, and trespassing. As the handcuffs were placed on his wrists, he continued protesting his innocence and demanding that the deputies investigate my supposed mental health issues instead of focusing on his actions. Jessica had a complete emotional breakdown when she realized the full extent of Brad's criminal behavior. Through her tears, she admitted that she had never wanted to participate in the scheme but had been threatened and manipulated into cooperation. She revealed details about Brad's gambling addiction and connections to dangerous creditors that explained his desperate actions. My parents initially refused to believe that their son-in-law had committed serious crimes, insisting that the situation was a family misunderstanding that did not require police intervention. Linda blamed me for creating conflict, instead of working with the family to resolve our differences peacefully. Robert continued arguing with the deputies about property rights and family inheritance law, demonstrating a complete lack of understanding about the criminal nature of forging legal documents. His insurance background had given him confidence in handling paperwork, but he had no comprehension of the legal boundaries he had crossed. Steve's investigation revealed that Brad had used family members' personal information to apply for credit cards and loans without their knowledge. He had opened accounts using my parents' social security numbers and Jessica's identity, creating financial obligations that they knew nothing about. The discovery of these additional identity theft crimes prompted the deputies to recommend that my parents and Jessica undergo immediate credit monitoring to assess the full extent of Brad's financial fraud. Deputy Martinez explained that they were likely victims of identity theft rather than willing participants in criminal activity. As Brad was loaded into the patrol car, he made threats about hiring expensive lawyers and suing everyone involved for false arrest and defamation. His confidence seemed unshaken despite the overwhelming evidence against him, suggesting a complete disconnect from reality about the seriousness of his situation. Jessica apologized repeatedly and begged for my forgiveness, explaining that Brad had threatened to divorce her and leave her with all of his debts if she did not help him secure access to the cabin. She painted herself as another victim of his manipulation rather than a willing participant in the fraud scheme. Steve advised me to press full criminal charges against Brad to prevent him from attempting similar schemes in the future. He explained that fraud cases often involve multiple victims and that prosecuting this case thoroughly could protect other families from becoming targets of Brad's criminal behavior. The evening ended with my family packing their belongings back into their vehicles, while deputies supervised the removal of their items from my property. The U-Haul truck that had symbolized their invasion became the vehicle for their defeated retreat down the mountain road. For the first time in months, I felt like I had regained control of my property and my life. But I knew that the legal battle was just beginning and that the emotional damage to my family relationships would take much longer to heal than any criminal case would take to resolve. Brad's arrest was just the beginning of a legal cascade that would expose the true scope of his criminal enterprise. When he appeared before Judge Patricia Williams for his arraignment, hearing the prosecution requested high bail due to his history of financial fraud and flight risk potential. Bail was set at $50,000, an amount that neither Brad nor my family could afford to pay. The denial of bail money became a turning point in my family's perception of Brad's character. My parents, who had been defending him as a misunderstood son-in-law, suddenly refused to mortgage their retirement savings to secure his release. The reality of potentially losing their life savings to support someone facing multiple felony charges finally penetrated their previous blind loyalty. Jessica was immediately terminated from her position at Dr. Harrison's dental office when her employer discovered that Brad had been stealing from patients' payment accounts using her computer access credentials. The investigation revealed that Brad had redirected over $12,000 in patient payments to accounts under his control, using Jessica's login information to cover his tracks. The dental office investigation was particularly damaging because it demonstrated that Brad had been using Jessica as an unwitting accomplice in workplace theft. Dr. Harrison's forensic accountant discovered sophisticated financial manipulation that required inside knowledge of the office's payment processing systems and patient information databases. Jessica faced potential criminal charges as an accessory to embezzlement until she agreed to cooperate fully with both the dental office investigation and the district attorney's prosecution of Brad's broader fraud scheme. Her cooperation agreement required her to provide detailed testimony about Brad's methods and timeline of criminal activities. I decided to press full criminal charges against Brad for all of his fraudulent activities, despite pressure from some family members to show mercy. Steve explained that prosecuting the case thoroughly was important, not just for my protection, but for preventing Brad from victimizing other families in the future. The district attorney's office became very interested in Brad's case when their investigation revealed that he had victimized multiple families across 3 counties using similar property fraud schemes. Detective Sarah Chen, who specialized in financial crimes, discovered that Brad had attempted to steal inherited property from at least 6 other families over the past 3 years. Brad's pattern of targeting families with recent inheritance disputes made my situation part of a larger criminal enterprise rather than an isolated family conflict. Detective Chen found evidence that Brad researched obituaries and probate filings to identify vulnerable families dealing with property inheritance issues. His methodology was sophisticated and predatory. Brad would identify families where one person inherited valuable property while other relatives felt excluded or resentful. He would then approach the disgruntled family members with business proposals that seemed to offer everyone a share of the inheritance benefits. The investigation uncovered business cards and marketing materials that Brad had created for multiple fake companies, including Heritage Property Management, Family Legacy Ventures, and Mountain View Business Development. These fictional businesses provided legitimacy for his approaches to potential victims and helped him gain access to sensitive family information. Detective Chen discovered that the couples who had paid deposits for weddings at my cabin were actually the lucky ones. Brad had collected advance payments from 17 other couples for weddings at properties he had no legal right to use. The total amount of wedding fraud exceeded $80,000 across multiple victims. Some of these victims had paid Brad their entire wedding budgets, believing they were securing exclusive mountain venues for their special days. The investigation revealed heartbreaking stories of young couples who had lost their life savings to Brad's fake wedding business schemes. During the investigation process, I received a call that changed my understanding of my grandfather's decision to leave me the cabin. Frank's attorney, William Morrison, revealed that Frank had specifically anticipated that my family might challenge the inheritance and had taken legal precautions to protect me. Morrison explained that Frank had been concerned about Brad's influence on Jessica and my parents' financial pressures during his final years. He had observed family dynamics carefully and recognized signs that some relatives viewed his property primarily as a financial asset rather than a family legacy. Frank had created a secret trust fund containing $120,000 specifically designated to help family members facing genuine emergencies. The trust was designed to provide assistance without compromising the cabin's ownership or creating opportunities for fraud. This fund could have legitimately helped Jessica and my parents if they had approached the situation honestly. Morrison revealed that Frank had left detailed instructions about how the trust fund should be administered, including specific criteria for qualifying emergencies and safeguards to prevent abuse. The fund was intended to preserve family relationships while protecting the cabin from being used as collateral or converted into commercial property. The discovery of Frank's trust fund made my family's fraudulent scheme even more tragic and unnecessary. If they had approached me honestly about their financial problems, the trust fund could have provided legitimate assistance without requiring anyone to commit crimes or damage family relationships. Jessica's cooperation with the prosecution revealed additional details about Brad's manipulation tactics and criminal timeline. She provided evidence that Brad had been planning the cabin takeover for over 18 months, beginning his research shortly after learning about Frank's death and my inheritance. Brad had created detailed files on my family members, including information about our financial situations, personality types, and potential pressure points that could be exploited. Jessica found notebooks containing manipulation strategies and psychological profiles that Brad had developed for each family member. The prosecution's case was strengthened by evidence that Brad had attempted similar schemes in other states before moving to Montana. Court records from Colorado and Wyoming showed civil judgments against Brad for fraud and identity theft, establishing a clear pattern of predatory behavior targeting inherited property. As the criminal case developed, my family members slowly began to understand how thoroughly they had been manipulated by Brad's sophisticated deception. My parents underwent family therapy sessions to process their role in the scheme and learn to recognize manipulation tactics in future relationships. Jessica filed for divorce and entered counseling to address the psychological trauma from months of being threatened and coerced into criminal activity. Her cooperation with law enforcement demonstrated genuine remorse and desire to rebuild her life without Brad's influence. The community response to news about Brad's arrest was overwhelmingly supportive. Neighbors who had been influenced by Brad's character assassination campaign against me publicly apologized for doubting my credibility. Mrs. Patterson organized a neighborhood gathering to show support and help restore my reputation. Local business owners who had been approached by Brad with wedding venue proposals came forward to provide additional evidence for the prosecution. Their testimonies revealed the scope of Brad's plans and the potential financial damage he could have caused to the entire community's tourism economy. As Brad's trial date approached, Steve prepared a comprehensive victim impact statement detailing the emotional, financial, and family relationship damage caused by his fraud scheme. The statement emphasized the importance of significant prison time to prevent Brad from victimizing other families and to send a clear message about consequences for inheritance fraud. The trial of Brad Thompson became a landmark case for inheritance fraud in Montana, with District Attorney Rebecca Walsh personally handling the prosecution due to its complexity and potential impact on other families facing similar schemes. The courtroom was packed with victims from Brad's various fraud operations, along with law enforcement officials who had worked to uncover the full extent of his criminal enterprise. Brad was ultimately sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and an order to pay full restitution to all victims. Judge Williams specifically noted that the sentence reflected not only the financial damage, but also the psychological trauma caused to families during vulnerable periods following the death of loved ones. The restitution order required Brad to repay the $12,000 stolen from the dental office, the $80,000 collected from couples for fake wedding venues, and additional damages totaling over $50,000 to families whose property rights he had attempted to violate. The total financial judgment exceeded $140,000. Jessica completed her community service requirements and successfully rebuilt her life with the support of professional counseling and family therapy. Her cooperation with law enforcement had been crucial in securing convictions, and the prosecutor's office acknowledged her genuine remorse and efforts to make amends for her involvement in the scheme. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once Brad's criminal convictions were finalized. Jessica retained sole ownership of their legitimate assets and was relieved of responsibility for Brad's gambling debts and fraudulent business obligations. She started fresh with a clean slate and renewed focus on building healthy relationships. My parents underwent an extensive healing process that included family therapy, financial counseling, and education about recognizing manipulation tactics. Robert and Linda gradually came to understand how their legitimate concerns about family unity had been exploited and weaponized by Brad for criminal purposes. The restoration of trust between my parents and me took time and patience, but their genuine remorse and commitment to rebuilding our relationship made healing possible. They participated in counseling sessions where we discussed boundaries, communication, and healthy ways to address family financial concerns in the future. I used Frank's secret trust fund to help Jessica get back on her feet legally and financially. The $120,000 fund provided her with resources for education, career development, and establishing independent housing. This assistance was provided according to Frank's original intentions, helping family members during genuine emergencies while preserving the cabin's legacy. The cabin became a symbol of healing and renewal, rather than division and conflict. I restored the property to Frank's original condition, repairing the damage caused during my family's invasion, and returning his handmade furniture to its proper places. Every room was cleaned and organized to honor his memory and vision. Following Frank's example of using the cabin to strengthen family bonds, I established the Frank Morrison Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provides mountain retreat experiences for families dealing with trauma and financial hardship. The cabin serves as headquarters for programs that help other families heal from betrayal and rebuild trust. The foundation's programs include family counseling retreats, financial literacy workshops, and legal education seminars designed to help families recognize and prevent fraud schemes. Mental health professionals volunteer their time to provide counseling services, while legal experts offer workshops on inheritance planning and family communication. My involvement with the foundation led me to meet Sarah Martinez, a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in family trauma recovery. Sarah volunteers as a counselor for the foundation's retreat programs, and we connected over our shared commitment to helping families rebuild relationships damaged by betrayal and manipulation. Our relationship developed naturally through our work together, built on shared values of honesty, integrity, and service to others. Sarah's professional background in trauma recovery provided valuable perspective on healing from family betrayal, while her personal warmth and intelligence made our friendship evolve into something deeper. The cabin where my family had attempted to steal my inheritance ultimately became the place where Sarah and I planned our engagement. We decided to hold our wedding ceremony at the property, surrounded by the family and friends who had supported us through difficult times and celebrated our commitment to building a life based on trust and mutual respect. The wedding planning process allowed me to use the property for its intended purpose, bringing people together for celebration and joy rather than commercial profit. Local vendors who had been approached by Brad's fake business were delighted to participate in a legitimate wedding that honored the cabin's true spirit. My parents, Jessica, and I all participated in the wedding preparations together, demonstrating how our family had healed from the trauma of Brad's manipulation. The event symbolized not only Sarah's and my commitment to each other, but also our family's renewed commitment to honesty and supporting each other through legitimate means. Frank's workshop area, which Brad had attempted to convert into a commercial office, was restored to its original purpose and became the space where I built our wedding arch from lumber that Frank had been saving for special projects. Working with his tools and materials felt like receiving his blessing for the new chapter in my life. The experience taught me that protecting what is right sometimes requires standing alone against people you love, but integrity ultimately attracts genuine love and support from those who share your values. Frank's decision to leave me the cabin was not about favoritism. It was about recognizing who could be trusted to preserve his legacy with honor. Family relationships built on manipulation and entitlement will always be fragile and destructive, while relationships based on respect for boundaries and honest communication can withstand challenges and grow stronger over time. The people who truly care about you will support your well-being rather than trying to exploit your resources for their benefit. Brad's criminal scheme ultimately failed not because he lacked intelligence or planning ability, but because he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of trust and family love. His approach was based on exploitation and deception, while lasting relationships require honesty, respect, and genuine concern for others' well-being. The cabin stands today as Frank intended, a place where family and friends gather to create positive memories and support each other through life's challenges. Sarah and I continue hosting Family Foundation retreats while building our own life together, surrounded by people who choose to be in our lives because of love rather than obligation or financial opportunity. Let me ask you something that might help you think about your own family relationships. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted tried to manipulate you into giving up something important to you? How did you recognize the difference between genuine need and calculated manipulation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. I want to thank everyone who listened to this story for taking the time to hear about my family's journey through betrayal and healing. If this story resonated with you, or if you think it might help someone else who's dealing with family manipulation or inheritance disputes, please consider liking this video and sharing it with people who might benefit from hearing about how we rebuilt trust after such deep betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories about families overcoming challenges and learning to build healthier relationships based on respect and honesty. Your support helps me continue sharing these experiences that remind us all of the importance of protecting our boundaries while keeping our hearts open to genuine love and healing. I hope your own family relationships are built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and honest communication. And I wish you the strength to protect what matters most while remaining open to the healing that comes when people truly change for the better.